I am taking a break from tweeting out top 10 mid-major lists. Brad is taking a break from getting Rutgers' account tweeting about his work. It's been a successful week for the CBB Central podcast team, but we're still going to get after it with a little bit of rankings, not rankings as much as really deep dives on these teams. And the next two we have on tap today are Nebraska and West Virginia, two teams I'm pretty excited to talk about. Brad, how you doing, my man? I've been loaded with Twitter notifications all week. It's been a ride. I'll say that. It's been a fun one. I talked to a lot of cool people and had a good time. But overall, I mean, how are things, man? It's been almost 2 weeks now. It's been like a week and a half.
Yeah, things are pretty good. Your mid-major lists have gotten a ton of traction. I was surprised with the Rutgers account tweeting my top 40 transfer article because I had Peter Kiss at 28th, which even when I was looking back on it, I thought that could be a little low for Peter Kiss, but they were all for it. I've been surprised how many players who have responded to my articles that weren't upset with their rankings. Like Jaquan Lyle, I had him 4th, which was pretty high, but he like tweeted out like a positive emoji, like a hands praying emoji, like he was hoping that he could be that good. I had figured more guys would be like, screw you, I'm number 1. I don't know what that says about players these days.
Yeah, I haven't had too many weird player interactions. I had a couple players once they saw the list blowing up who were big guys slide into my DMs to try to gain some goodwill before the rankings come out. I had Mike Dahm follow me on like Tuesday, hoping to get his name on the list tomorrow. I'm sure he'll see him tomorrow. Had some interactions with some coaches. I had one assistant coach from an unnamed mid-major school send me an essay about why their point guard was the point guard deserving of the list, and that how he didn't make my list was absurd. But other than that, it's been a positive ride. It's been a fun ride. So let's dive into it. There's been actually some, for this time of year, big college basketball news that's come off. Before we get into these deep dive previews, let's start with at Kansas. We have Sam Cunliffe transferring out of the program. Never really got a foothold there after obviously being a top prospect coming out of high school, and then looking good early in his career at Arizona State before transferring to the Jayhawks.
And so with Cunliffe, he only lasted half a year at Arizona State, even though, I mean, he averaged, I think, almost 10 points a game during that span. And I think clearly Kansas was just a step too high. Like, if he really wanted out of Arizona State, I mean, there were plenty of other high majors that would have loved to have him. He was a borderline top 50 recruit, I think. But at Kansas, I guess he wasn't really playing well, and he was stuck kind of in a logjam behind guys like Svi Mikhailuk and LeGerald Vick, who were very solid players. So between the opportunity and then he wasn't even playing well to begin with, that was kind of the death sentence for him. But because he was a mid-year transfer, he did lose a year, but now he'll gain that year back by sitting out at his new destination, and he'll be a sit 1, play 2 transfer.
Yep, he's a Seattle native, so I mean, maybe Washington might be an interesting destination. I'm sure every Mountain West school with a scholarship will try. I don't think they'll have much of a chance. We'll kind of see what happens there. I think he'll be an interesting piece, kind of on this late transfer watch. But I guess my only question is, if you're Sam Cunliffe, and I understand the LeGerald Vick news came a little late, and that may have impacted his decision, because Vick was one player who does stand in the way of him to playing time. Why are you waiting until now when almost everyone's filled their scholarships? You kind of knew you weren't going to play. Why is it coming until the last week in July for you to announce you're transferring? But I guess that's a little rant on my end.
I think it would be more understandable if he were a grad transfer, because that'd be all right. I've waited so long that all these teams that are now desperate, teams that have missed out, maybe I can play at a higher level or get more playing time because the team is more desperate and just really needs to fill that spot. But whereas he's a sit-out transfer, it's like you mentioned Washington, who does have an open scholarship, but I mean, there's a real possibility he goes there and then gets recruited over in that year that he's sitting out. Same at another school that has a ton of scholarships, open that is Oregon. Both those schools kind of look appealing as of July 26th in terms of playing time. July July 26, 2018, but when it's July 26, 2019, maybe he'll be buried again on the bench.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I've looked at with up transfers in particular, with like the Mount St. Mary's guys 2 summers ago when Miles, what was his name?
Wilson.
Miles Wilson. Yes, I was thinking Miles Simon. I was like, that's just not who it is. Miles Wilson and Elijah Long were transferring. It was like at the time it looks like an intriguing destination, but both playing time have kind of been cut out. So I think that's something I've been looking at. The other transfer we have was Brandon Rashal, who began his career at LSU, had some trouble off the court, but is kind of a 6'5", almost a small ball four, I think is probably his best spot. Had a bunch of high majors out of high school, and then had a decent year for the Tigers, averaging 4 points, 3 rebounds. Final 4 games of the season, he averaged about 7.5 points and 7 rebounds. So he's a capable player, and he's transferring from LSU. We kind of figured one might come with the log jam that they had at on the wing and still recruiting a 2018 piece in Andre Hyatt. We kind of figured they had a transfer coming. This is the shoe to drop. I think high majors will get involved. I'm really hoping to see him go down to a mid-major, maybe like a Charlotte. I know, or another type of CUSA school, maybe UTEP, where he could really be a star in my mind.
I think he could even go a little higher, maybe like a UMass, or like an Atlantic 10 school that has a scholarship and could really use his athleticism in playing that 4 spot full time, where he kind of had to split between the 3 and the 4 at LSU, especially if he was still on the team for next year and wanted to make the rotation with Emmett Williams and Naz Reid and Darius Days and Kavell Bigby Williams. He would have a more likely path to playing time there as like a backup 3-man. But I think with his athleticism and kind of skill set, he's more suited for a small ball 4. And I think a lot of different Atlantic 10 schools would love to have him. Maybe Davidson too.
Yeah, it could be an interesting piece for a bunch of schools. He's a sit 1, play 3, so a lot of flexibility there. I wouldn't be surprised if multiple high majors offer him. Like, I'm pretty sure Auburn has a scholarship that could make sense. It's just one of those where I always look for playing time spots, and I don't know that's necessarily how players think. So we'll kind of see what happens there.
And then just lastly, we wanted to touch on Valdir Manuel, who is a top 150, kind of like a power forward center. He's kind of similar to a guy that Seton Hall had, Michael Enzi, who's going to be a senior this year, except Manuel has a higher upside, but there were academic concerns with him even getting into Seton Hall, so he makes a switch to St. Joe's, which I think if he's eligible to play this year, I think this is a really good move for him. I think it really cements St. Joe's front court rotation. They had a lot of different like stretch skill guys, with like Taylor Funk and Pierre Francisco Oliva, who have both started in the past, and they're both more of like stretch 4 kind of face up skill types. He brings kind of like a rebounding and an athleticism and a toughness that front court lacked.
Yeah, I really like this get. I will say generally that I know they've waved off these reports that it's academic in terms of that he will be eligible. That's what the reports are. I've read multiple kind of articles on the St. Joe side that have said he'll be eligible. I will say a talent like this doesn't wind up at St. Joe's this time of year and not at the several Northeast schools that have open scholarships and could use a guy like this. If there wasn't something going on behind the scenes that was causing a bit of a holdup. Now, that's not to say that he's a bad kid or anything, but like Illinois desperately needs a big guy. There's no chance this kid is at St. Joe's over Illinois if Illinois wants him.
Yeah, I think that Pitt could have really used a big guy. St. John's could have really used a big guy. Even in the Atlantic 10, I think UMass is another big man away, to kind of split time with Rashawn Holloway. I know they have Kalia Turner, but he wasn't that great last year, I don't think. But they were another big man away from being like a real contender in the Atlantic 10. So certainly a excellent get for St. Joe's, and Manuel will definitely play more as a freshman at St. Joe's than he would have at Seton Hall, because they had Torian Thompson, and they had Sandro Mamukelishvili, and they have Ike Obiagu sitting out. So this is a more clear path to playing time, and I think St. Joe's certainly has a chance at the auto bid if they're healthy. And who knows? I mean, we had this discussion in depth and at length in the George Mason podcast, but who knows? Maybe the second place team in the Atlantic 10 can kind of leverage that kind of mess in the middle to even make the NCAA tournament as a bubble team.
Yeah, I think this move definitely increases the upside of this St. Joe's team pretty significantly. He averaged 10-7 on the AAU circuit for New Jersey players. That's really the only consistent stats that I look at is if you have the YBL stats, just because they're pretty well tracked. But they 10-7, blocked a fair number of shots. Actually shot 45% from three on about one and a half attempts a game. So has some shooting upside, very athletic. I think he'll start at the 5. You can play him next to Funk, even or he comes off the bench, the first big off the bench with Oliva playing next to Funk. But I think I was kind of hovering in the 6 to 8 range for St. Joe's. Between him and Troy Holston, I think I'm going to hover more in that 3 to 5 range. I think this increases the upside pretty significantly.
Absolutely. And I think with that, we can move on to our deep dive. Coincidentally, the first team that we're touching on, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, also recently lost a player to transfer, and that was Jordy Chimenga, who is a huge he was like 6'11", like close to 300 pounds, like a big body, but he was pretty quick for his size, pretty mobile, left-handed, had some solid games for them, more so as a freshman than he did last year as a sophomore. But losing him, especially at this stage, really takes a hit on their front court, even though he kind of lost a starting spot to a smaller lineup. They don't really have another guy his size, or even like another center at all, who's experienced and can definitely step in for this team. In terms of some of their other we should start with probably a synopsis of Nebraska last year. So Kevin, do you want to kind of break down Nebraska's season?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nebraska went 22-11 last season, 13-5 in the Big Ten, for a 4th place finish. Obviously, that finish was debated a bit given their easy schedule. They didn't really beat anyone in Big Ten play of note, other than they beat Michigan at home. But at the same time, it was 13 Big Ten wins. It was a huge step for that program. It was a program that came into the year not really expecting much, and Tim Miles did a great job with this club. And they couldn't make the NCAA tournament. They just didn't have the wins. The metrics weren't there, but it was a year that I think gave everyone belief that Tim Miles could possibly be the guy. It was almost a Brad Brownell type year, if that makes sense. And that Brad Brownell kind of hovered on the bubble of fired for a really long time, and then would have a good enough year where people would be like, he's safe, and then he'd have a bad enough year where he'd get fired, or he finally did this year where he had a good enough year to be safe, and then he had a big enough year where he gets a contract extension. We'll see if Miles can kind of put it all together this year with a veteran group. He does bring back his top 4 scorers in James Palmer, Isaac Copeland, Glenn Watson, and Isaiah Roby, and really it's been about the transfers for Nebraska, given their struggles to recruit high school products. James Palmer, the Miami transfer, exploded onto the scene into an all Big Ten player. Isaac Copeland, the Georgetown transfer, had struggled throughout his career at Georgetown. He was a big player for them last season. And then Roby was not a transfer. He was one of the natural products for them. It was Anton Gill, the Louisville transfer, who provided them some good minutes. He graduates, but was a pretty nice piece for this club.
Yeah, I mean, in the past few seasons, they've been absolutely destroyed by the transfer market, between losing Andrew White to Syracuse, losing Ed Morrow to Marquette, losing Michael Jacobson to Iowa State, where I don't think he's even going to play very much at all this year. They also lost Turan Petaway to an early entry to the NBA draft. So, I mean, as as well as transfers have worked out for this program, they've also been hit equally or even more hard than they even benefited from it. In terms of this gaudy Big Ten record due to this unbalanced scheduling in the conference, they only played Michigan State, Michigan, Purdue, and Ohio State once each in the regular season, and they even only played Maryland once, who was like that sixth place team. They did play Penn State twice, which was their second best win behind the Michigan win. Both the Penn State and Michigan wins were at home, I believe. The best road wins they had were over Wisconsin and Northwestern. So I mean, yeah, this profile really lacked a lot of substance. In that Big Ten record was really the only thing that they had to hold their hat on, but they didn't even have to play the toughest teams in the conference.
Yeah, in terms of that road win at Northwestern was the day after New Year's Day. There was, I think, 5,000 people in attendance at 15,000 seat Allstate Arena, and Bryant McIntosh didn't play. So that kind of tells you all you need to know about how light the schedule was for Nebraska. That's one of their up games.
And same with Wisconsin. I mean, they lost Kobe King and Dimitri Trice, and I think other guys were banged up all season too. So just kind of a smoke and mirrors record. It's not to say that Nebraska is not going to be good this year. I think that they will be solid, but as we'll touch on later, I mean, I think they're being pretty overrated so far by the national media. And in terms of just kind of how this team operated last year, they gave up a lot of 2-point baskets, especially when they switched to the smaller lineup with Copeland and Roby as their bigs, which helped them offensively, and they were still a good team on the defensive end, especially limiting 3-pointers, especially taking and making 3-pointers, both aspects. But they were killed on the defensive glass with a small lineup, and while that gave them more of an offensive punch, it still wasn't good enough to offset the kind of rebounding and size deficiencies they had.
Interestingly enough, though, they did block a lot of shots for a team that was pretty small. That was just a weird statistical thing that I noticed. They were 15th in the country in total blocks at 183 blocks for the season. They were second in the Big Ten with 95 blocks in Big Ten play. So it's a pretty strange stat given their relative lack of size and relative lack of a elite shot blocker. But I mean, there's no one on this team where you were like, wow, this guy blocked a ton of shots. Roby blocked 2 shots on the weak side, which is he's probably the biggest. He was definitely the biggest shot blocker on the team, but they got to block a game from Isaac Copeland. They got to block a game from Dubio KK, even though he only played 7 minutes a night. And they got some decent weak side help from a guy like James Palmer. So interesting statistic. I don't know how much it means, and I haven't looked into it enough to tell you whether that's a trend for all Tim Miles teams or if it's just one weird season. But I think it is an interesting thing to note, given that they do play small.
Yeah, I think just Copeland and Roby are very long and athletic, and then Dubio KK in the film I was watching to prepare for the podcast. I mean, he had 2 or 3 blocks in just like the few minutes that he was in. He's someone who I think if he was better on the offensive end, like even just like a little bit, like not even being like an average offensive big, just being like a little bit better, I think he could have really made a bigger impact and kind of stabilized that front court, because he was certainly capable in terms of rim protection. But they certainly were better with this smaller lineup, and I expect them to kind of continue this trend, partly because they have really no one else who they could throw in except for one of their incoming freshmen, Brady Hyman, who is ranked, I think, 350th in terms of the 24/7 composite. And their other 2 recruits are in that same range. Carrington Davis, who's been a late stock riser, his stock kind of rose this spring, and he landed this Nebraska spot. He's kind of a 2-3, like a wing who can shoot a little bit. He can put on the floor a little bit. But I mean, he was ranked in the mid 300s. And then Amir Harris, the former URI commit, was very athletic. He's a very good passer at that point guard position, but he's a complete non-shooter.
Right, and I don't think they bring in anyone who's going to make a big impact this season. I think Hyman will be forced into a small role as a freshman. As a big guy, he'll have to play some minutes, but He's 6'10" and listed at 200 pounds. He's very skinny, and that's going to be a problem in the Big Ten. I mean, you can't go up against big guys like Nick Ward, like Derek Pardon, like Ethan Happ at 6'10" and 200 pounds. You're just going to get eaten up.
Especially when you compare him to like a team like Iowa that's going to play with two bigs with Tyler Cook and Luka Garza. I mean, there was very little tape on Hyman, but from what I saw, he seemed fairly skilled. He's just so skinny. He's going to be more of like a project guy, especially the learning curve for big men is very steep. And I like just before the podcast, I was taking a look at some of the guys who are ranked in this range in the class of 2017, and how they kind of panned out as freshmen. The one kind of positive player in that group from 250th to 350th in the composite was Sterling Manley for UNC. Then the second best big man, maybe Olivier Sarr, maybe Theo John, who's not very good at all for Marquette, maybe Jalen Butts from DePaul. But that just kind of shows you the level of freshman big man that kind of comes in this range.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good call. Let's kind of look at the rotation because there's 4 spots that are ironclad. James Palmer, who I think is in the running for Big Ten Player of the Year. Isaac Copeland, who 13.6 rebounds a game last season, very solid. Glenn Watson, who provides that kind of scoring combo guard who will run the show for this team. He's more of a natural scorer by trade, but he has to play point guard just kind of due to lack of options. Not an efficient player, only shot 35% from the field last season, but he's the guard who handles the ball, and they really need that. And then Isaiah Roby, who is kind of getting some sneaky NBA buzz at 6'8", very athletic, played really well last season, especially down the stretch, averaged about 9.6 rebounds a game. That's the 4 that's going to play a ton of minutes for this Nebraska team. My question for you, Brad, is what do you see after this group? Because they lose Evan Taylor, who played a lot of basketball for them. They lose Anton Gill, who played a lot of basketball for them. And they lose Jordy Tishimanga, who played a fair amount of basketball for them at 4 points and 5 boards a game. They even lose a guy like WKK, who gave them 8 minutes a game as a big guy and just in a rotation type of look. This freshman class last season, the 2017 group, none of them really showed much. Thomas Allen gave them some minutes, but he's kind of a combo guard who doesn't really fit well on the backcourt next to Watson. They'd be playing really small if he's there too. I just have some big questions about how this team looks.
I think you have to go with Thomas Allen to start the season based on this roster. Although I think in terms of style of play, I think both Nana Atenkin and Amir Harris are pretty good fits in that lineup. But I just mentioned kind of the recruiting rankings involved, and Harris was ranked in the mid 300s, and his kind of passing abilities and his size makes him a very nice fit next to Watson, who's more of like a scoring attacking guard. But guys who are ranked there usually don't contribute right away on a NCAA tournament team playing in the Big Ten, and that the fact that he's a total non-shooter kind of hurts as well. And then a guy like Nana Atenkin, he was ranked much higher. He was ranked, I think, in the Rivals 150. In 24/7, he was at 187, but he only played 7 games last season and only 3 minutes in the last the last portion of games where it made it so he could no longer redshirt. So I think Allen's got to be that guy basically for default, but you are right, that's a very, very tiny backcourt. The positive thing is like all 5 of those guys can really shoot the ball, and they'll really spread you out, and they'll be a much more dynamic offensive team than they were last year. But without a glue guy like Taylor and an experienced guy like Anton Gill, I think this team's probably going to be a lot worse defensively.
Right, and even just, it sounds small, but I'm going to keep bringing back WKK. I mean, he blocked 1 shot every 8 minutes he played. Like, that's valuable off the bench, especially against Big Ten bigs. A guy who can come in and give you fouls and give you minutes and energy and block a couple of shots. I mean, that's a more valuable piece than I think a lot of people will recognize. But I mean, I like Harris. I mean, at that 2 spot, kind of that one, he's really the 1 on offense and the 2 on defense, where he'd be guarding 2s, and Glenn Watson could kind of venture out off the ball. But like you said, the recruiting ranking isn't promising. I mean, we'll have to see what he can bring, but just overall, there's just not a lot of depth here. Like Thomas Allen, like, was he good last season? I don't really think so. He shot 40% from the field, played 10 minutes, scored 3 points and a rebound tonight. Like, he's not a game changer. Like, at some point, one of these freshmen from last season has to step up and be at least like I would say a high level rotation player for this Nebraska team if they're going to have an NCAA tournament team. And I just don't see Thor Bjarnason. He was pretty quiet for Iceland in the FIBA U20s. Nana Kenton, as you said, maybe a guy with some talent, but didn't show it last season. I really question the depth here. I'm starting to really sour on this Nebraska team.
Yeah, I had to move them down too. I had them as like an 8 or a 9 seed. I moved them down to like a 10, 11 seed because, I mean, this is probably the worst bench among any team that has a realistic shot at an NCAA tournament bid. It may even be the worst bench on paper, like among like Power 6 basketball. I mean, it's really, really thin. I mean, your most experienced guy played 3 minutes. He played two minutes in Big Ten play. I mean, the other 3 guys were ranked in the 300s. Then I'm glad that you mentioned the thing about Thorpe Johnson in the FIBA U20 because I was meaning to ask you about that. But I mean, Allen is kind of the guy by default. He had some really high expectations coming into the year. He was a former NC State commit. He had a Kansas offer that was, I think, like an actual like offer, like he could have committed to them. And I mean, he can really shoot the ball. I'm not sure kind of what else he's going to do for them this year as a sophomore. I think he has a very bright future, but between the fit in the backcourt and kind of the kind of massive jump that they need him to take, it's not super promising.
Yeah, and I'll just give you the stats real quick on Thor Bjarnason. He averaged 9 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists. At FIBA, that's not bad by any means, but when you compare it to the rest of the Iceland team that he was playing on, like, for instance, Yngvi Gudmundsson, who's headed to St. Louis, he's John Axel Gudmundsson's brother. He like significantly outplayed him. He was by far the better player. And this is a guy now who has a year of college experience under his belt. This is a guy who was at a bigger school. I just can't say that I have much expectation for Thor Bjarnason as a rotation player. I mean, this might be the best group of 4 players in the Big Ten outside of Michigan State. Like, I'm not completely uncomfortable in saying that, but it also might be the worst group beyond their best 4 players in the Big Ten. It's a really big, interesting divide for me.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of a better foursome off the top of my head. I can't, because Michigan certainly doesn't. Unless like you're really high on guys like Ignas Brezdiakis or something, but yeah, I think Nebraska probably, or maybe Indiana, maybe Langford. No, but then after Langford and Morgan, it's kind of a steep drop off there too. Yeah, so I'm very confident in saying that, or affirming your statement that Nebraska has that second best foursome behind Michigan State. I'm also a big Isaiah Roby guy. I was watching some film from him when I was doing my top 5 breakout players in the conference. He kind of reminds me a little bit of DJ Wilson, except he has more like power in his game and isn't quite the shooter that Wilson is. But they're both guys who can play that 4 or the 5 spot in college. They can attack closeouts. They're very athletic for that power forward position. And I think Roby's really in for a breakout season. And then in terms of the FIBA U20 again, wasn't Elijah Clarence from Illinois State like the best player in the tournament?
He might have been. And that in fairness, he was really good. Like, he looked terrific. I will say he looked incredibly athletic, incredibly good. They had there were some interesting players. Like I watched Krister Zorix. He was at the B level, so it's not really a good comparison, but he played pretty well. He's a St. Mary's guy. Elias Valtonen looked pretty good for Sweden. Was it Sweden? I'm forgetting which country he was playing for. He looked pretty good, though. He's an Arizona State commit. I watched a game of his. But overall, yeah, it's not like a super high level of competition. So I would have expected a guy who's going to be a Big Ten contributor to play legitimate minutes and play really well.
Because just for some perspective, Clarence last year at Illinois State played 11 minutes a game, averaged 2.7 points a game, shot 24% from the field. So even if he's a lot better and is like a solid like starting shooting guard or like combo guard in the Missouri Valley, if he's that much better at the FIBA U20 level than Thorpe Johnson, just like think about that in terms of perspective and if he will contribute at Nebraska and why that looks so unlikely to me.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I am, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about Isaiah Roby. I'm really high on him. He averaged 13 and 9 over his final, I believe it was his last 7 last season. It was last 8 games. He averaged 13 and 9. I had that written down. He even shot the ball pretty well last season. He shot 41% from 3, albeit on fairly limited attempts, but he shot it a little more down the stretch. He took 3 attempts from 3 in his final 2 games of the season, 3 attempts from 3, 5 games before the season ended in a ball game against Illinois, took 2 against Indiana. Like, he showed some confidence in stepping out and taking that shot. And with the athleticism that he has, he's going to be a tough guy to guard on pick and roll as a dive man. So if he can step out and hit that pick and pop 3, that's going to be even more dangerous. There's also maybe a skip pass where he winds up on the perimeter. I think I'm not going to say he's going to be their best player, but I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year he's their best player over James Palmer. Yeah,
from what I've seen, he's certainly worthy of like a second round flyer. I think you are correct. As the season goes on, he's going to be more firmly in the draft picture. In terms of where you have Nebraska in the Big Ten, where did you have them kind of before the deep dive and then versus now?
I've dropped on them, to be quite honest, after this dive fairly significantly. Right now, I don't think they're an NCAA tournament team. Like, I just don't like. I like Tim Miles. He's a good guy, but he's not that high level a coach. You have a high level core and then no bench. You have a point guard who's inefficient. For me, this team gives off all the warning signs of being overrated preseason. I think they're going to be in that 8 to 11 to 12 range at the Big Ten that has Northwestern in it, that has like maybe Maryland's in it, Penn State. I think that's it, Iowa. I think they're in that tier of the Big Ten at this point. Like, I mean, obviously I watch a lot of Northwestern and I'm a little more confident in their abilities next season than I think most people are. But I think I'd take this Northwestern roster over Nebraska's unless Isaiah Roby becomes like a superstar.
Yeah, so I had them prior to the deep dive. I had them in 4th place, just behind Michigan State, Michigan, and Wisconsin. In terms of nationally, I had them kind of as like a 8 or a 9 seed. But I've since moved them down to 6, so not as far as you dropped them. I just put Indiana now at 4 and Purdue now at 5, and I have Nebraska slightly ahead of Ohio State, who's my 7th team. I still think that this team can make the tournament, especially after kind of diving more into like a guy like Amir Harris, who I do think fits really well, and maybe could leverage potential playing time to kind of improve from where he's ranked. But I do agree that I definitely soured. The bench is definitely a concern, and they really need guys like Nana Akenton, Brady Hyman, and Harris to really make jumps that aren't probable based on their kind of body of work.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I also think this is a pretty interesting time to kind of get your feel on Tim Miles. Um, Given that this is the year, like Nebraska has to make the NCAA tournament this year. Now, will he get fired if they don't? I don't know that that's the case, but they're not going to make the NCAA tournament the year after that. I'm incredibly confident in saying that because you're going to lose Glenn Watson, James Palmer, and Isaac Copeland, and probably Isaiah Roby. And given just the lack of talent on this roster, they have Deshaun Burke sitting out next year, but he's not exactly a superstar at that level, at least. They're going to be bad in 2019-20. Like, he desperately needs to make the tournament. He's under contract through 2020-21 season, which is what? He's got 3 years left on his deal, that would mean. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if he gets given that the salary was not announced for the 2020-21 season, but the 18-19 and the 19-20 were announced. It wouldn't surprise me if that final year is non-guaranteed, which would imply, or at least not fully guaranteed, which would imply that he could be hot seat if he doesn't make the NCAA tournament this year, even to the point of a surprise firing.
Yeah, I was thinking that myself, looking at next year's roster, because you're looking at, even if Roby comes back, a starting lineup of like Thomas Allen, Datchin Burke, Nana Kenton, Isaiah Roby, and then either you go big with Hyman or small with Amir Harris. I mean, that's really not looking so hot. And then, I mean, they still have 2 open scholarships. Like, maybe they could add Brandon Richell. I mean, he would add something for that front court. Maybe you take a flyer on Sam Cunliffe, but I mean, there's nothing out there really that's going to change too much. I don't really know their 2019 recruiting status too much. But in terms of this season, something really interesting to note, that the national media, kind of based on my top 25 composite rankings that I've taken from 16 different too early top 25s, they're actually very, very high on Nebraska, to the point where Nebraska is the first team outside of the composite top 25. They're in 5 of the 16. Someone has them at 16. I will find who that is now. That is Andy Katz has them at 16. Athlon Magazine has him in there at 24. I think Aaron Torres from Kentucky Sports Radio has him in there. Boston Brackets has him at 25. I don't know if that's Lucas or Tristan who has them at number 25. And someone has him at number 19 too. That's Torres. All right, so that's a wild overranking based on all the research that we've done. So either they're kind of overrating those top 4, or they just haven't kind of done the due diligence, because it's very, very hard to make a case for them as a top 25 team.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I will note they lost Xavier Johnson late in the process, and now this did kind of open things up for them to go get Amir Harris. But they lost Xavier Johnson late. He was a signee in the fall. He was a 200 ranked combo guard, 200 nationally combo guard who's winding up at Pitt now. And is he like a superstar? No, but he'd probably be starting at the 2 for this team. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I know that Providence liked him too, until they signed David Duke there. Just kind of taking a look at their guys that they have offers out, I haven't really heard them like too involved, like just based on like reading Twitter and like looking at like Crystal Ball. Just like off the top of my head, I haven't heard them like as leaders for any of these guys. I mean, Zach Harvey is like a local guy. I think he's more with Kansas and with Creighton. You know, I'm certainly not an expert on these guys, but just based on what I've read, like Matthew Hurt, I mean, there's no way that he's going to Nebraska. Noble Days, I think he's more Wisconsin. Akol Arop is on here. Didn't they have like a controversy when they let his brother off scholarship? So I mean, maybe they could turn to the JUCO ranks, but I don't really see a lot of optimism here.
They just offered Mika Adams Woods, who's a point guard from the City Rocks, who's pretty good. It's his first like big offer. He has interest from Purdue. He has a Nevada offer. Took an unofficial to Siena in the spring. Siena's recruiting him pretty hard. Iowa's looking at him as well, but hasn't offered. Like that's kind of the level that they're looking at. And he's the same ranking as these guys that they're looking at right now. And that like he's in that 250 to 300 recruiting range, which is like a solid prospect. But they're going to need impact guys. You know, that's a guy who's going to impact the MAC or the MVC or the A10 right away. But he's not going to guy who's going to impact the Big Ten right away. So, yeah, that's the level of guy I think that they're really going to be looking at. And granted, it's hard to recruit to Nebraska when it is not exactly a populous area. It is not a destination basketball town. I mean, they have a great fan base, but it's not a destination spot to recruit to especially when you don't have a history of being like a top program. But Tim Miles, I think if Tim Miles can't get to the NCAA tournament and save his job, that's going to be the thing that cost him was he just didn't recruit at a high enough level.
Yeah, and you know, fans will be very quick to point out like all the exceptions of like these like low ranked guys like a Sterling Manley from last year or like a Zaire Smith, where I know Providence fans are very quick to point out like Bryce Cotton, who was completely unranked and then became like a college superstar. But the odds are so against that because there are so many guys who you just don't even remember that these 2 and 3-star guys who come high major and they're there for 1 or 2 years and then they just fall completely off the face of the planet or go down to the mid-major. So there's just so many more kind of failures in there than the overwhelming successes. So when like fans are bringing up these anomalies, it's just like the probability is so low, but you're just so biased that you just can't kind of rationalize it. You just think that every guy is going to be the exception. I know I'm certainly not immune to this. I mean, even with this Providence class, with guys like Chris Monroe and Jimmy Nichols, been hearing things about how well that they've been playing in the preseason, and everyone's, you know, myself included, penciling them into spots in the rotation. But you know, you always have to kind of check yourself and kind of realize things from like a more macro perspective.
Yeah, I think that's all we have on Nebraska. Our consensus seemingly is fringe NCAA tournament team, mid-pack Big Ten team. I'm a little lower than you seem to be, but we're both lower than national consensus.
Yep.
Right.
So on to West Virginia.
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So last year they had a great season. They were 12th in KenPom. They lost to Villanova in the Sweet 16. Everyone knows their style. They foul, they pressure the ball, they play long, ugly games that kind of hit like the 2.5 hour mark. You know, they force turnovers, steals, block shots, offensive rebounding, just grit and grind. But they kind of lose 2 of their stalwarts. Javon Carter and Daxter Miles are both off to the NBA, to the Grizzlies and to the Kings respectively. They were 4-year starters at the guard position. That's going to be incredibly difficult to replace. They also lose a key rotation player in Teddy Allen, who kind of showed a lot of signs as a freshman. He's like a scoring wing, kind of like a poor man's and like a smaller TJ Warren. He's off to Wichita State. Then they lose kind of 2 other bench guys in Bender and D'Angelo Hunter.
Yeah. And what's the national consensus on them? Because I've found the national consensus to sound high, but the more I've thought about this team, the more I just feel like I want to bet on them, and we can kind of go from there.
I'm actually the only person of the 16 to not have them in my top 25. Every other person does. The highest ranking is 8th, which I think is absurd.
Yeah, that feels really
by Athlon magazine. They have them 8th. They come in overall with an average ranking of 18.13, which puts them as the 17th team in the composite, 1 ahead of LSU, 1 behind Mississippi State.
That's interesting. Okay, so I can run through their recruiting class if you'd like.
If you need a break, we can switch off halfway through because they have what 7 guys.
I have them down for 6. So
I was counting Napper too, but
okay. Well, I'll let you do Napper. I'll do the other 6.
All right.
The highest rated recruit is Derek Culver, kind of a smaller 5 out of Brewster Academy, which is a top prep program, number 81 nationally in 24/7 composite. That's a really impressive level of recruit for them. I know they're really in on Oscar Shibwe, who's a 2019, who's a really high level recruit, but this is not a program that we typically envision landing top recruit after top recruit, more of a developmental program. So for them to go into a crowd and land a guy like Derek Culver is impressive. They land Jordan McCabe, who's 112 in the rankings, undersized point guard from Wisconsin, who is the subject of many a mixtape. He's the other white point guard you see on Ball Is Life all the time, other than Mac McClung. He's known for his handle. I have questions about him contributing right away in that system, but he's got high upside. Trey Dooms, who is a 6'3" shooting guard out of another really good program, University School in Florida. He played rotation minutes for that team. Also a top fringe top 150. They have him at 168 in the rankings. Then they have Emmett Matthews from Tacoma, Washington, who is 176 in the composite. I believe he was did he decommit from UConn? Yes, yep. He committed from UConn. He's a long athlete. I thought he was going to go to Washington after he decommitted, but he wound up at West Virginia. I thought he was also going to look at Pitt. That didn't happen. Then they have 2 JUCO players, Jermaine Haley, who is a former top recruit who went to New Mexico State, barely played, and then was going to go to Wyoming, didn't go to Wyoming, wound up JUCOing and had a pretty big year at JUCO. He's like a 6'7" lead guard type who's going to be an interesting piece to watch. And then Andrew Gordon, a top JUCO prospect as well, who's ranked by 24/7 as a top 10 JUCO. I have to look at like some of the more reputable JUCO recruiting sites to get my full sense of him as a JUCO prospect. But that's kind of where they are at this point.
And then just Brandon Napper missed last year with injury. He's another scoring guard, kind of fits their specific style. I mean, they're getting these kind of aggressive scoring guards, these long athletic wings, and then big men who are mobile, who rebound and who play extremely hard. Both Culver and Gordon really fit that mold in terms of bigs. I think Culver's he kind of looks more like a 4, but kind of based on the roster, you would think he plays more of like the 5. I mean, he could play the 4 next to Konate, kind of like what they did with John Holton. I think Devin Williams as a front court a few years ago. In terms of Gordon, yeah, I saw that 24/7 had him in the top 10, and then the JUCOrecruiting.com didn't have him ranked at all, which I found strange. I think probably 24/7 is closer with that ranking. He's someone who if Culver's more of a 4 than a 5, he could get some time. And then Jordan McCabe, a lot of people think that he's like the savior who's going to come in and replace Javon Carter right away. But guys in this range, the range that I kind of looked at was from 80 to 120. You don't get a guy who's going to come in that range and be a starting point guard on a good team. You either get guys who are kind of listed at point guards who play off ball, kind of like a Kellen Grady from last season, or from a few years ago, Carson Edwards was in that range, or the kind of guys who get a lot of minutes and play well on like a bad team, kind of like last year with like a Trent Frazier or like a Brad Davison. So again, kind of like what we were talking about with the Nebraska recruits, getting guys in this range who you want to be a high level, high major starting point guard from day one. It's just not very realistic.
I also just generally have questions about a guy who's listed at 5'10", 155 on 24/7 and 6 foot 175 on verbal commits, being a starting point guard and dealing with the just the grind that is a West Virginia basketball season in terms of will his body hold up and will he compete? Will he be able to play at a defensive level high enough to, contribute to winning big time. I mean, obviously he's going to play less minutes than maybe other starting point guards. He might kind of rotate in with Jermaine Haley. You could play some Bolden at point guard at times. I know he's more of a combo. Like they have some pieces that they can play in the backcourt. But I do think it's really, I think that's a big question mark that shouldn't be counted on the way that it is.
Yeah, I think it's really like their only question mark, though. I think other than point guard, I would say kind of just like the overall talent level. I mean, they have Sagaba Konate, who's an excellent player, but then kind of after that, like Asa Ahmad's good. Lamont West was kind of disappointing last year, but he's solid. I really like Wesley Harris, and this bench is very inexperienced, but just kind of like what's the ceiling of that core? But besides point guard play, this is a pretty sound roster. Very good defensively, very long and athletic. It's just I think you really hit the nail on the head there with I think McCabe's just getting a little too hyped up based on like the mixtape and the high school stats versus kind of just looking at the probability of everything.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much a good way of summing it up. I guess my other question with this team is like, it's kind of a weird question to put into words. I don't really know how to describe it. Is what does their backcourt really look like? Because like Bolden 6 feet tall and not nearly as good a defender as you might expect from a West Virginia backcourt. Like Daxter Miles was a good defender. Javon Carter was a great defender. Bolden's small. McCabe's small. They're going to need some size to play the two. Now, I think Trey Dooms has a chance to really crack the rotation this year. I'm pretty high on him. That is based on like a half of a game I saw of him against Montverde in, I think, March or April. It was a weird day where I was just sitting alone watching weird high school basketball. It was a time. But like where do they fit on the wing? I mean, Jermaine Haley is not a shooter. So I don't, and he was listed at 6'8", 215 at JUCO. He's not a shooter, so I don't really like playing him at the two, especially if you're going to be big across the front, even if Konate is going to shoot the ball, which is an interesting question that we can touch on as well. I think Dooms is going to play minutes, but like I feel like they're missing a wing. They're a bit repetitive up front between West, Ahmad, and obviously Konate. You're not going to want to play all three at once. Although obviously with this system, you're going to rotate through bodies pretty quickly. I just have some questions kind of about the roster construction. Maybe you can absolve those concerns for me real quick.
Yeah, I think that you make a really good point too about like a secondary creator, where like guys like Ahmad and West and Harris, you know, they're not really guys that are going to create their own shot that much. Like maybe Ahmad a little bit, but West is more of like a spot up shooter. Konate is like a big man. And then Bolden can certainly create his own shot. I don't know if he can create shots for other people. At least he hasn't proven that thus far. So I'm not sure if he's really a great starting point guard. And then we kind of mentioned the concerns with McCabe. You know, they have a lot of different options here, but I think it's kind of underrated or underreported how much they need to rely on some of these freshmen to give them some creation, especially in the backcourt. In terms of my projected starting lineup, I went with kind of an unrealistic one, but the five guys who I think are their best players, and Bolden, Harris, Ahmad, West, and Konate. Harris is a really good defender who I think can definitely guard guards, but he's more of like a three, and Ahmad and West are 3-4s. And I like players like Haley, that kind of like the glue guy type, kind of like the Kyle Anderson role in like the NBA, not his role at UCLA. But he's someone who's also kind of like a 3-4, even though he has some point guard skills. So it's just very, very interesting roster. Kind of wish that some of these guards were a little older and a little more experienced.
Right, and I guess what's your expectation from James Bolden? I mean, this was a guy who last season averaged 8 points, 2 rebounds, and 1 assist. I mean, he's sure, and that was only in about 17, 18 minutes a game. I mean, he was an impressive scorer. But I don't have very high expectations of him taking the next step from I can go get my team a bucket when I'm playing next to either Javon Carter or Daxter Miles to I'm running offense. Because McCabe, I have questions about, as we've said. We both kind of have these concerns. and then we have Trey Dooms, we have Emmett. I'm blanking on the last name here. Emmett Matthews. I keep going Emmett Williams and going, that's not correct, and then just losing the page that I was on. It's a rough night on the podcast. Anyhow, I really struggle with this backcourt and putting together how they're going to create efficient offense. And while that's less of a concern when you're going to create a lot of easy buckets with your defense, I think it hinders the upside of a team like this. I mean, that said, your system's going to win you games that you shouldn't. So I think it's balancing that's going to be an interesting preseason conundrum for me with this West Virginia club.
Yeah, I think that Bolden could maybe average like 14 points a game and like 3 assists.
Yeah,
kind of be like a mini Carson Edwards from last year, who averaged like 18 and 3. I just don't know. Like, Bolden's probably like the 4th or 5th best player, but he's definitely the best scorer. I don't know what kind of green light he gets, especially with so many other guards in the backcourt who could maybe fit a little bit better. Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and they could use like a Trey Dooms or like a Brandon Napper, to really add some more creation there. They do get a lot of easy buckets off turnovers and through transition, but they don't even really have the ball handlers unless some of these freshmen step up to kind of really be a true transition team.
Yeah, I'm really trying to piece together a lineup that I like, and I'm just really having trouble doing it. Like, I'm thinking what I would do if I'm West Virginia is I think I would start Bolden. I almost would start Bolden, Haley, and then start Ahmad, West, and Konate across the front.
Okay, yeah, so it's just no Harris.
No Harris, yeah.
Yep.
I think you'd get a little bit of ball handling from Haley at the 2 and a little bit of like the more natural point guard. Have him play 2 and then guard 2s, and then Bolden can be freed up to score a little more. And then you have like McCabe off the bench. You have Trey Dooms off the bench. You have Harris off the bench. He can kind of anchor that second unit. You can bring the 4-star freshman Derek Culver off the bench, who should be a nice piece. I think that's the lineup I like the best in terms of like the way it all fits together in my mind. I have no idea if that's what Bob Huggins is going to do, though.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that last season, the Harris, Ahmad, West trio kind of went 2 in, 1 out, where I think Harris was the starting 3, Ahmad was the 4, and then West came off the bench. Mm-hmm. So I think you're going to see 2 of those players in at once, as opposed to having Harris play up at the 3. And then Haley, I think you are right that Haley might be able to give them enough kind of ball moving and creation to make a more cohesive lineup. In terms of like projecting a rotation, usually I say let's project the top 9, but I think with Huggins, it's more appropriate to do like a top 10. So who are kind of the 2 or 3 players that you think are going to be on the outside looking into this rotation?
I would say that's a great question. I don't think like Chase Harler is going to really play.
Yeah.
I would say he's one. Maybe Logan Rout as well.
Well, I wasn't even counting him, but yeah, I don't think he'll play either.
He never really plays. So yeah, he played 31 minutes last year though. 31 games, I should say, 8 minutes a game. So he did play a little bit. I think he kind of gets bounced from the rotation though.
Yes, then I think probably Emmett Matthews too.
Yeah, I think it's probably safe to bet on one of Matthews. It kind of depends. Like Matthews could play more if like McCabe winds up being the point guard, because like if they wind up playing Bolden at the 1 and then playing more like of a combo 2, like a Haley, let's say they do like the Bolden Haley thing.
Yep.
then either McCabe or Napper probably gets boxed out of the rotation because they're small point guards. You can't really have three of those in the rotation. You're going to have one with Bolden. But if you're going to play more of like a McCabe starting point guard and commit to Bolden as more of a 2, then I think Napper's going to play behind McCabe, and then then definitely a wing, either Haley or Matthews, or even Trey Dooms gets knocked out of the rotation.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think Andrew Gordon is probably pretty safe just because of how often they foul. So as Culver can play the 4 and the 5, I think he's obviously in. Just kind of like his grit and grind style and like his junkyard dog style. And I think Gordon, even if Gordon's like the 11th man, I think he could still get minutes just because he's mobile and just with how often the Mountaineers foul. I think that there is at least a small role there for him.
I will say Gordon put up pretty small numbers at West Virginia. I have at last check, statistically, he averaged like 4 points a game in JUCO, but that was his freshman year, and then he didn't play his sophomore year of JUCO. So I think he tore his ACL. So I think that's the explanation why he's not ranked by JUCO recruiting. That's just something I just recovered. So he didn't play last season, so we don't really know. He blocked a fair number of shots as a freshman in JUCO and was like a rotation player and was on track for a bigger role, then tore his ACL in a pickup game. So take that.
Yeah, that definitely makes more sense as to his ranking. I think with the Bob Huggins style, he's going to be so limited offensively anyway. Like they're not going to really post him up or anything, that he can just go out there and kind of run around for 5 to 8 minutes, block some shots, get some rebounds, foul some people, and kind of be a consistent piece there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. So does that wrap up our rotation talk of this team?
Yes.
All right. So the big question: where do you have them, Brad?
So I had them as a 10 seed before. I've moved them up 2 seed lines to an 8 seed. So that kind of puts them in that 28 to 32 range nationally. I think I was kind of underrating guys like Issa Ahmad and even Konate in terms of where I had them prior. But I think definitely the point guard questions in the secondary creation questions, just kind of like the overall talent level of some of these pieces, I think it's quite reasonable to keep them out of the top 25. Although I certainly wouldn't blame people for a top 25 ranking because literally everyone else has them. And with the Bob Huggins style, I think that this roster, even if some of the pieces are a little inexperienced, I think this roster really fits his style of play.
Are you on the Konate as an All-American bandwagon?
Yes, I am. I mean, I'm not sure if I would put him there, but I think that's certainly a very reasonable and a selection that I will definitely warrant when I'm making my All-American picks.
So yeah, I think that's pretty much. I think I have him in he's a top 20 to 25 player in college basketball next season, top 30. So like right now outside of the All-American cusp, but like wouldn't surprise me if he gets there. As for their ranking, I had them 20 in my official too early top 25. I think I still have them in that 20 to 30 range. I think I'm pretty confident in Kansas and Kansas State at 1 and 2 in the Big 12. And then from there, I have a big tier of Texas Tech, Texas, West Virginia, TCU, and Iowa State. And I literally could see West Virginia finishing 3rd or 7th in the Big 12. That whole range I see is like fairly interchangeable, mostly because I'm pretty high on Iowa State. I'm pretty high on Texas. I think Texas Tech is going to do some things with Chris Beard. So like overall, that's just kind of like the tier I have them in. I would say preseason I'll probably have them in the top 25 and probably top 5 in the Big 12, probably top 4. But I think that 3 to 7 range is pretty wide open. That's where they'll fall depending on how their point guards shape up.
Yeah, I agree 100%, except I just have them 7th. I have them 1 spot behind Texas Tech in the national rankings and 3 spots behind Iowa State in the national rankings. I'm also very high on this Iowa State club. And then I think the the addition of Matt Mooney makes Texas Tech a tournament team once again. But the Big 12 is so strong, especially that top 7. I think that there is a pretty big gap from West Virginia to Baylor, and also another gap from Baylor to Oklahoma State, who I have at number 9. And I think Oklahoma's going to be very bad and be the clear last place team. But I mean that top 7 is all clear cut tournament teams to me, and to have 70% of your league in that kind of category is very impressive for a league.
Yeah, no, the Big 12 is going to be super fun. I think that's just a pretty easy thing to say. I think that wraps us up for this show, Brad. I mean, anything else we have on either of these two clubs? I think I went down on both of these teams slightly in doing these previews tonight. So sorry, West Virginia and Nebraska fans, when you may or may not be in my top 25 next time I tweet one of those out, whenever I decide to.
Yeah, I'm a little higher on West Virginia, but that's more course correcting on my part, and then I'm a little lower on Nebraska. I think West Virginia is certainly the better team of the two, and I think that they're certainly more likely to make the NCAA tournament than Nebraska. But if I'm a Nebraska fan, I would be fairly optimistic that they're at least a bubble team, at least in the mix again, for a tournament bid. And if they can take care of business a little better with some more quadrant 1 or some more quality wins, I think Tim Miles will be here to coach another year.
Completely agree. That wraps us up. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for sharing my work over the last 4 days. Thanks for sharing Brad's work over the last month. He's been putting in a ton of work over at Busting Brackets. But I know I can speak for both of us in saying we really appreciate the support, both of the podcast, of our written work, of our tweets. It's been a fun ride. And just hope to keep continuing it. We're less than 4 months from college basketball, and I think that's good news for everybody involved. Have a good night, everybody.